My name is Ava Merrick, and at 3:17 in the morning I learned exactly how quiet survival can be. I was lying on the living room floor, cheek pressed against the hardwood, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic from downtown Denver. My vision pulsed at the edges, where the bruise on my temple throbbed, but my breathing stayed steady. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call his name. Silence was the only language Lucas understood. He had stormed upstairs hours earlier, convinced he'd won the argument, if you could call a grown man smashing my phone against the wall and dragging me by the arm an argument. The door slammed, the bedroom lock clicked, and the house finally went still. I pushed myself up slowly, feeling the sting across my ribs where he'd kicked me. My hands shook, but not from fear. Something colder, calmer had settled inside me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the vanity light, and stared at the woman in the mirror. Split lip, swollen cheek, a fingerprint-shaped bruise blooming on my shoulder. Evidence. All of it. I lifted my phone, cracked but barely alive, with 3% battery left, and took photos. One by one. Angles, timestamps, reflections. Proof that could outlive the excuses he would make in the morning. Then I sent them all to Riley along with a short message. Don't call. I have a plan. I cleaned the blood from my chin, changed into a simple sweater, and wiped every surface he touched tonight. Not to hide anything, to prepare. Then, while the sky outside remained ink black and the city slept, I set the dining table, brewed his favorite coffee, and laid out a breakfast that looked like peace. Tomorrow morning, Lucas would walk down those stairs expecting forgiveness. Instead, he would find our guests, and his face would turn the color of ash. By sunrise, the house looked almost gentle from the outside. Soft light slipping through the blinds, touching the tidy living room, the wedding photos, the color-coded bookshelf Lucas insisted on. Anyone passing by would think we were the perfect couple, the kind who hosted dinner parties and argued only about who loved the dog more. Inside, every breath made my ribs throb. I moved slowly, not from fear he'd wake, but because each step reminded me what 4 years of love in the Merrick house had cost. It hadn't always been like this. In the beginning, Lucas made life feel cinematic, glowing date nights, spontaneous trips, roses at my studio just because. His charm felt like a place you could build a future in. But charm is cheap when the patience behind it runs out. The shift was gradual. Jokes sharpened into criticisms. Apologies twisted into blame, rules framed as concern, until they became commands. He chose my friends, my jobs, even how much makeup was appropriate. I told myself it was devotion, anything but what it was, control. When Riley asked why I'd stopped coming to Boulder, I lied about work. The truth was, Lucas said she put ideas in my head and staying quiet was easier. Each year I promised I'd leave, and each year that promise shrank the way I did, quietly, invisibly. Until last night. My hands still ached where he'd grabbed me, but the fear was gone. Something steadier lived in its place. Upstairs the floorboards creaked, Lucas turning in his sleep, unaware that the version of me he expected at breakfast no longer existed, unaware that every second he slept brought him closer to the moment his world would begin to crack. The night before hadn't erupted all at once. It built slowly, like a storm pretending to pass before it finally breaks. I was finishing a layout for a children's book when Lucas barged into my studio, whiskey soft on his breath. He held my phone screen, glowing with an email from a long-time client. "Who's Brian?" he demanded, though he already knew. "A graphic editor," I said. "Then why is he emailing you at 11? Because deadlines exist." I should have softened it, but 4 years of shrinking makes a woman brittle in ways she doesn't expect. His jaw ticked. "Delete it." "I can't, it's work." The glass in his hand slipped and shattered. The storm arrived, his voice rising, then his hands, the familiar cycle of rage, remorse, and threats about who I'd be without him. The phone he threw embedded itself in the drywall, a cracked symbol of everything he wanted to own. But this time I did not crumble. I watched, counted his breaths, catalogued everything, the blocked doorway, the twist of my wrist, the way he checked the windows to keep the world blind. When he finally stormed upstairs, something in me stayed completely calm. I waited for snores, then gathered the pieces of my phone and retrieved the USB drive I'd hidden for weeks. I backed up every photo, every message, every bruise. He thought silence meant obedience. He never understood it could be strategy. Now, in the early morning quiet, I reviewed every file and timestamped the truth I'd finally stopped ignoring. The evidence was ready, the plan already moving. And upstairs Lucas slept as if nothing in his world was about to end. By 7, the house smelled like cinnamon and fresh coffee. I plated the waffles exactly how Lucas liked them. Crisp edges, strawberries in a neat fan, as if the night before hadn't left bruises blooming under my sleeves. The table looked perfect, the kind of scene couples post with captions about slow mornings. Perception had always been Lucas's favorite currency. Today it would undo him. The shower upstairs cut off. Footsteps followed, heavy and familiar. I knew the expression he'd wear, the smug morning softness he used after every explosion, as if his slate reset while mine never did. Right on time he appeared, stretching, smirking. Wow. Trying to make up for last night. I didn't answer. I stepped aside so he could see the table, so he'd walk right into the moment waiting for him. But he froze when he heard voices from the living room. Who's here this early? Before he could move, Detective Danielle Brooks stepped in, badge visible. 2 officers and Marcy Claremont, my attorney, stood behind her. Lucas blinked, confusion sparking across his face. What is this? I pulled out a chair. Sit down, Lucas. Ava, you can't call the cops every time we argue. Danielle cut in. This isn't about an argument, Mr. Merrick. We're here regarding a domestic violence report and supporting evidence submitted at 4:06 a.m. The color left his face. What evidence? I placed the USB drive on the table. It made a soft click, louder than any scream he'd ever dragged out of me. Yours, I said. He reached for it, but an officer stepped forward. Sir, hands visible. Lucas's breath stuttered, panic spreading fast. Ava, baby, let's just talk. No, I said. You've talked enough. And for the first time in 4 years, he understood he wasn't in control, and it made him go pale. The moment Lucas realized the room no longer bent to him, he stopped performing. The charm evaporated, excuses dying before he could speak. He sat rigid in the dining chair, jaw locked, watching Detective Brooks review the photos and audio I'd gathered overnight. Marcy placed a thick, tabbed folder in front of me. We'll file for an emergency protective order today. You won't have to return to this house. We'll arrange a police escort to get your essentials. Lucas's head snapped toward her. Protective order. Ava, come on. You know I didn't meaning it doesn't erase what you did. I said, still not looking at him. Detective Brooks slid over a transcript from the recording. The threats, the slammed doors, the crack of my phone against the wall. Lucas reached for it, then froze when an officer lifted a hand. Mr. Merrick, she said, you will be served a temporary restraining order. Any violation is an immediate offense. He let out a shaky laugh. This is insane. She's twisting everything. I finally looked at him. I don't need to twist anything. You created this. The anger in his eyes was familiar, but for the first time it didn't touch me. The officers told him to stand. Danielle read the TRO terms. He tried arguing, then fell silent, staring at me like I'd rewritten the world while he slept. When they took him outside the quiet he left behind felt lighter than air. I packed only what mattered. My laptop, a sketchbook, a sweater. Marcy drove me to Horizon's Safe Network, a warm 2-story building in a quiet Denver neighborhood. Bright windows, soft colors. A place built to make women feel less alone. Staff greeted me by name. Someone handed me tea. Another woman gave me a soft blanket, as if she already understood the tremor in my hands. For the first time in years, I slept without checking the locks, and when morning light filled the room, I felt something unfamiliar. Safety. And beneath it a small, growing spark of power. The safety I felt at Horizon didn't last. Not because the shelter failed, but because Lucas couldn't tolerate a world where he wasn't the center. The TRO barred him from contacting me or going near anywhere I might be. For 48 hours he obeyed, stunned into stillness. Then the notes started. Not texts, he wasn't that careless. Instead, messages tucked under my car's windshield outside the shelter. We can fix this. Then you're overreacting. And finally, if you won't talk to me, I'll make you. Horizon staff reported everything. Detective Brooks added each note to the growing stack of evidence. Marcy reminded me not to respond. He's testing boundaries, she said. Abusers always want to see if the leash is really off. The real turning point came 3 weeks later at the hearing to extend the protective order. The courtroom smelled of coffee and old paper. Lucas sat across from me in a navy suit meant to look respectable, his face arranged into confusion and wounded pride. When the judge asked for his statement, he launched into a speech about miscommunication, claiming he'd been blindsided by a hysterical, unstable wife. The same words he'd used to shrink me for years now polished for the courtroom. Marcy stayed steady. Your Honor, the petitioner calls a witness. A man I'd never seen, Tyler stood. A bartender who'd worked under Lucas for 14 months. His voice trembled as he described Lucas screaming at staff, grabbing a server's arm, throwing a shaker at a busboy. Nights he'd heard him brag about keeping his wife in line. Lucas's face snapped into a snarl. "You're lying," Mr. Merrick, the judge, warned. "Sit down." He didn't. He slammed both hands on the table, shouting that this was a setup, that everyone was against him, that I'd ruined his life. Mr. Merrick, one more outburst, and he cut the judge off again. 2 officers moved at once, grabbing him as he thrashed. Metal cuffs closed around his wrists, the sound sharp and final, like punctuation on the sentence of the last 4 years. Lucas looked at me as they dragged him out, not with power, with fear, and for the first time I felt completely unmistakably free. Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly in small moments, almost too gentle to trust. The morning after the hearing, I sat in Horizon's common room with herbal tea sunlight filtering through the blinds. For the first time in years, my body wasn't braced for footsteps or slammed doors. I breathed fully, and nothing chased that breath away. Dr. Hayden met with me twice a week, helping untangle the places where Lucas's voice had replaced my own. Some sessions were heavy with memories. Others were spent unpacking the guilt women are taught to carry when they leave someone who hurt them. "You survived him," she said once. "Now learn who you are without him." Work drifted back into my life with a kindness I'd forgotten. A Denver publishing house offered flexible projects, and I spent afternoons drawing again whimsical animals, warm little houses, scenes full of the gentleness I'd been starved for. One night after finishing a cover, I opened a blank canvas. My hand moved on its own, sketching dim hallways, cracked windows, a dinner table beside a shadow. I titled it, "The Rooms I Survived." More pieces followed. Pain turned into color, memory into shape. When I posted the series anonymously, I expected nothing. Instead, messages arrived from women everywhere. "I recognized this room. I lived here too." Their knowing felt sacred. Riley visited often with takeout and quiet loyalty. She never pushed. She waited until I was ready. When I finally told her everything, she simply listened. Life wasn't perfect, but it became mine. I found a small apartment near Capitol Hill. Big windows, a quiet street, a bedroom that caught the sunrise. I furnished it slowly, intentionally, with nothing Lucas had ever touched. And one morning, as I hung the final print from The Rooms I Survived above my desk, I realized something both simple and monumental. I had built a life with no shadows that belonged to someone else. Months later, the courthouse felt different. Not heavy, just final. Lucas sat in an orange jumpsuit, the confidence he once wielded gone. The prosecutor laid out everything: photos, audio, witness accounts, the notes left under my windshield. It didn't feel like my life being exposed anymore. It felt like closure taking form. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on multiple counts of domestic assault and violating a restraining order, Lucas didn't look at me. Maybe he finally knew I wouldn't look back. I left the courtroom lighter. Life afterward wasn't a cinematic sunrise. Healing wasn't clean. Some nights I still jolted awake expecting shouting or breaking glass. But therapy grounded me, routine steadied me, and art became the bridge between who I'd been and who I was becoming. The Rooms I Survived grew beyond anything I imagined. A Denver gallery asked to exhibit it. Opening night felt surreal, strangers studying pieces of my past, interpreting shadows I had once feared. Riley stood beside me, proud, while women murmured, "Your work looks like my past too." I hadn't healed alone, and I didn't have to. Horizon Safe Network invited me to teach an art workshop on processing trauma through visual storytelling. Sitting with women who were bruised, rebuilding, and brave, I watched color and line become language. Within those soft lit walls, I felt my purpose shift. One evening, walking through Capitol Hill, I passed a window glowing warm, a couple laughing over dinner, silhouettes untouched by fear. For a moment, I let myself imagine a future like that. Not built from survival, built from choice. Back home, city lights spilling across the floor, I opened a new canvas and sketched a window wide, bright, unlocked. Not a room I survived, a room I created. And as I drew, the truth settled quietly, powerfully. Lucas ended a chapter, but he never wrote the book. I did. And every room, every morning light, every steady step forward belonged to me now.